Maybe a good place for us to start is, because this is not the first project that Google and EDF have worked on, maybe talk a little bit about the partnership over the years and how it's developed before we get to the latest news.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. Karen and I have actually been working together for over a decade, and it's culminated in this amazing partnership regarding methane sat. But have you guys talked about methane today? Should I just do a little methane?
I would do methane primer. We're a little low on methane.
So let's see. Environmental Defense Fund is an environmental advocacy organization. We have about 1,000 people now worldwide. And one of the fundamental principles that we operate on is science, economics, and policy. So I work in the science area. And about 10 years ago, we were looking, as a lot of other scientists were as well, at short-term greenhouse gases, methane being one of them. And basically, if you do the math on methane, it's extremely potent. It's about 80 times more potent at warming in the short term. Carbon dioxide is obviously very, very important, and it certainly has long-term impacts. But if we're talking about making a difference in our lifetimes, the leverage you get from looking at methane is enormous. And so we started doing studies to figure out how much methane was coming from natural gas, from cows, from agriculture, from coal mines. And the oil and gas sector became really interesting to us as a potential advocacy avenue, because if you know where the leaks are, you can fix them quite easily. And it has the benefit of being a product. So it's pretty cost effective to look at reducing methane leaks in general. So as part of our scientific exploration, we were deploying sensors to see how much methane was coming from various segments of the oil and gas infrastructure. And the way that it was typically estimated was through looking at the type of valve you have and multiplying it by a leak factor, and that's how you would sort of annually figure out how many emissions you had. But we wanted to see empirical data. We wanted to measure how much methane was actually coming out of the infrastructure. And so we asked Google if we could partner to deploy a sensor on the Street View cars, so they were driving around anyways. We were looking at the segment of local distribution, which is the pipes that run under your cities to deliver natural gas to your houses. And so we were like, well, your cars are driving around. How's about let's partner and figure out how we can make a difference looking at methane leaks in local distribution systems. And it was a thing, because it hadn't been done before. Yeah. We hadn't worked together before. And so we had to overcome several sort of engineering challenges, I would say, as well as just policy differences in our organization about like liability and indemnification, So Karen and I persevered and eventually launched the methane mapping project, which really opened the eyes of EDF in terms of taking advantage of infrastructure that existed, i.e. the Street View cars, to be able to affect change.
Yeah, I remember it was about 2011 when I got pulled into a meeting with Millie, and that's when the project started. And I'm Karen, by the way. Nice to see you all. I lead science and impact programs and partnerships for Google Earth, which includes kind of the Google Earth Engine family as well, where we try to understand planetary processes through cloud-based remote sensing, image analysis, and data analytics. And so I lead the part of the team that works with nonprofit organizations, academic researchers to further the science and the impact. And so, and not just methane, but also deforestation, water consumption on agriculture, and other things like that. My personal area has been methane and air quality, mainly because of that meeting I got pulled into back in 2011. But yeah, at the time we were thinking about how we could potentially use the Street View platform, the same platform that we use for map making for Google Maps, that last mile, helping us get to the door or of the restaurant or whatever. We thought, hey, if we're already driving around city streets, can we also double this as an environmental sensing platform? And so it started as a pilot, but we did eventually grow to something like 15 cities, right, around the U.S., where EDF did all of the policy partnerships, the government partnerships, and the utility partnerships, because this was in partnership with a lot of utilities on the ground there. And we were the technology provider, not just the Street View, but also a lot of the cloud computing that was needed to analyze a lot of points of data.
Did you want to talk about the air quality work and how it grew?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that project lasted for several years, but during that we thought, let's not stop at methane, let's go even more pollutants. Of course, particulates are both, particulate matter is something that is harmful to our human health, as well as NO2 and black carbon and other pollutants, which can be harmful not just to human health, but also to our planet. And so we thought, let's map more. And so we enlisted the help of other partners. One of them is ACLIMA, another one is University of California, Berkeley, and Josh Apte and the scientists there, and Millie can maybe talk more about the science, but that kind of expanded what we did with Street View, and we ended up even going outside the U.S. Do you want to?
Sure, yeah, and the thing that I think is interesting is before we really started looking at hyperlocal mapping for air pollution, the sensors were big, they are still big and expensive, and there's like one per city, basically. So putting sensors on cars and driving them around to see if you could create like a stable understanding of the surface of air pollution block by block is a scientific conundrum, because all of a sudden you have so much data. Is it dirtier now, or was it like 5 seconds ago, and how does the GPS match up? And you can just imagine in your head like how complex that conversation gets. And so the thing that I think is so interesting about our partnership is that there's science that we provide and that we provide together with partners. But there's a lot of cloud, and there's a lot of just like information management that Google helps with, along with the technology and infrastructure. And then there's the advocacy, which is so critical, I think, to making a difference. So I always say like there's like a technical challenge that we go to, but then there's like a people challenge, which is how do you change human behavior? And so I think it's a powerful partnership because EDF really leans in, obviously, to the advocacy side. And in the case of the air quality work, we actually started our pilot in West Oakland because of a lot of logistical reasons, but also because it's the 5th or 4th busiest port in the country. There's a lot of, it's surrounded by freeways. There's a lot of, unfortunately, air pollution to study there. And so eventually we hooked up with an incredible local environmental justice group there that had already been working on air pollution there for over 20 years. And we were able to like leverage basically their political power and their understanding of the neighborhood. So we give them data, and they were able to insert it into a community airplane, the first of its kind in California, working directly with the local air district. So all kinds of players are necessary, all kinds of people, but yeah.
I think that's a great example. We talked about it earlier, where that organization has what, two members?
Two full-time people.
2 full-time people. There's no way they'd be able to collect this much data, let alone process it.
Yeah.
And you give them the information, and then what were they able to do with it? What case were they able to make using real data?
Well, of course they live there, so they know, to be honest, to be perfectly honest, where it's dirtier. Yeah. But people don't believe them. People who make decisions about their lives don't believe them until they have like data, a map, like prove it, which is really sad, but it's true. In order to influence the decision makers, you really need information. And so like the local Bay Area Air Quality Management District is a really good partner, and they're very involved, and they know this too. And so we're sort of just building the case. We're helping to build the case to show that there were sources that were contributing to disparate air pollution impacts and the levels that were different than was previously anticipated. I mean, a lot of this is sort of taking it out of the modeling world. Because you can model, if you know the sources, you can sort of model a lot, but then like having proof by measuring exactly how much is there is helpful to change.
Were they able to get some policy gains and actually get some changes?
There's a community there's a community air plan that they put forth. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, and now we're going back. I don't remember how many measures were actually instituted, but now we're going back to measure to see if the air pollution plan worked or not. Right. Yeah.
So
it's very complex because there's regional sources of pollution that they can't impact. There's local sources. In that particular neighborhood, a lot of it has to do with the diesel trucks that idle as they go to the port. And so there's small things you can do, electrification or like no idling or like change the routes or whatever. But yeah, it's a complex soup.
So, and the cars are always moving. So that's another variable.
The Street View cars?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
So you're like, you start on the street level, and then you're like, you know what if we could do this from space? So how do you go from that to...
Are we ready to transition?
Yeah, let's go.
So thank you for that. You're like,
level.
Enough. We're ready to talk about satellites. So basically, when we started looking at, like I was saying, we're looking at methane, primarily from oil and gas production, we realized that we would never be able to get like a broad enough view, essentially. We can't fly a plane over every oil and gas field in the world every day, which is kind of what we wanted to do. So then it was like, I guess we need a satellite, which is kind of bananas if you think about it. Like, what nonprofit group's like, hey, I'm going to satellite? So not only that, but after we realized that we needed a satellite, we realized that there were no spectrometers in existence that would be able to do what we needed to do, to measure at the resolution and as far away, 590 kilometers in low Earth orbit. So we worked with BAE. I guess it was Ball, but now it's BAE Systems. They built 2 spectrometers that would allow us to see methane from 590 kilometers from space, and they had to develop like new grafting systems in order to split the light so that we could, it's the lowest concentration of methane that we could see. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing now. MethaneSat I'll just tell you, we'll show you the complete picture. In addition to large leaks that are the point sources that a lot of people are focused on, MethaneSat will also be able to show the smaller, more spread out sources, which our studies are showing make up the majority of emissions in a lot of basins, which is kind of like a big aha moment, because clearly super emitters or sort of, just you're thinking about, okay, let's fix the 4 leaks that we need to, and then we'll solve half the problem. But what about the rest of the problem? And so we should work on both. And there are other satellites out there that also look at methane, which we're very grateful for as part of this whole ecosystem, who will be much better at looking at very specific and small, like geographically located targets, whereas our satellite, MethaneSat, looks at the broad picture. So for example, we can look. So if you think about like an airplane flying over an oil and gas basin, it's kind of like a lawnmower. It needs to like and as you're doing that, you're varying both space and time, which is very difficult to figure out like what's going on the ground. So if you have a satellite, you can just take one picture, which is great because then you're keeping time more constant. And our satellite has a wide enough swath to see like the Permian in just 2 scenes, which is really, I think, beneficial. Again, the technical issue is just half of the problem. The other problem is this people challenge I'm talking about, because a lot of times it's just as easy as fixing a crack in a pipe. But why aren't they doing it? They know about it's a matter of
You think
priority.
that they do know, though? It's not that they don't know.
Well, they don't know exactly where they are.
Right.
They're also not compelled to do it because it's difficult. I mean, you've got like 1,000 little leaks. Why are you paying attention to that?
Expensive,
so
too.
It's expensive. So I was going to just hand it back over to Karen to talk a little bit about the distribution of the information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when Millie first came to us about MethaneSat, we got very excited. And one of the things that got them excited about working with Google is because at this point she knew about Google Cloud and Google Earth Engine and how we bring satellite data down to hundreds of thousands of people, scientists every day, to do scientific analysis. And so we talked about, okay, how could we get MethaneSat data distributed every day that MethaneSat is releasing data? How do we get it in front of scientists that work in academia, scientists that work for energy companies, energy industry, scientists that work for public sector, government agencies that are trying to understand how well their regulation is working or maybe design new regulation. And so we have these users, they're on it every day, doing it for all sorts of different things, from air quality and emissions to agriculture, landscape changes, deforestation, and more. And so we talked about supporting EDF through helping them power their entire satellite pipeline with Google Cloud, and then distributing the data on Google Earth Engine so people can access the data. And then we took it one step further where we decided, like, let's partner up and help improve upon some of the oil and gas infrastructure data that's out there. So basically the data that's out there around how many well pads or how many pump jacks or how many oil wellheads is somewhat incomplete depending on where you look in the world. Sometimes people are required to report, sometimes certain companies may voluntarily release that data or whatnot, but it's definitely spotty depending on where you look, even within the US state by state. And EDF has done an amazing job aggregating all the data that's out there publicly, and so we decided let's team up and combine that data that they've already collected and aggregated and combine that with some top-down, like let's actually look and see if we can map what looks like well pads all over the world and what looks like storage vessels all over the world. And this happens to be something that Google Maps is really good at because we're already doing this for crosswalks and for trees and for other items that exist in high-resolution imagery. So we've been working together now for a year or two and trying to help augment and accelerate the work that EDF's already doing there.
Yeah, it's like a totally different perspective on the planet. We've already talked a little bit about satellites today, so the audience is warmed up, but it's like, it was never before possible to see the entire world this way. The concern, of course, being that you create all this data, you find these leaks, and then how do you spur action? How do you get to that next step and actually solve some of these problems so that you're not just, publishing data in a vacuum?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have some momentum associated with methane. 50 companies representing over 40% of oil and gas production globally. So that's a lot of production, of the production pie, have already pledged to reduce their emissions by 90% in the next 6 years, which is, to me, that means that they actually already know how to do it. I mean, and they do, right? It's just a question of the operations and having the motivation. And so I like to say that it's really powerful when we can provide companies and governments with the knowledge that we're going to provide them with, but it's even more powerful when we all have that knowledge, because that's the accountability piece. That's the incentive that they need to actually, not only do they have the information, but they have the incentive to do what they're pledging. Over 150 countries have signed the Global Methane Pledge, which is also similarly inclined to really focus on methane. So I'm excited about those elements, and I think that having more data and other satellites that are also shedding a lot of light on where methane leaks are is going to provide, like I said, the incentive for them to follow through on their commitments.
So MethaneSat just went up not too long ago.
March 4th?
So it just went up. It's probably a little early to start determining how successful it is and how the data is being used. But what comes next? Like, what do you see over the next year for MethaneSat, and then what comes after MethaneSat?
Yeah, those are good questions. Well, I'm really focused on getting the data out in a timely way, and so to get the data, we get the data, we have to process it. Well, first of all, we're sort of talking to the satellite, like making sure that's working. It's working so far. I've never really done this before, and so I keep getting these reports.
Is this your first satellite?
Oh yeah. And so I'm getting these reports, and I'm like, is this bad? Literally, my email like, is this? Can you contextualize this for me? And
That is normal. Yeah.
that's what they keep saying. Yeah. This is not unexpected. I'm like, you can't like
so
XYZ. And they're like, don't worry, Millie, this is space. I was like, okay. So there's that happening in the background. But then the scientists are getting ready to see the first light targets, which we've already designated. It's very exciting. Literally, they keep telling me, Millie, we've never seen this kind of data before. So just calm down. Like, it's not going to be so fast. But we've practiced, because we have Methane Air, which is an airplane that has very similar spectrometers. And so they've looked at that data and are able to analyze it. And so yeah, so we have to analyze the data, and then it goes through the data processing platform, which is powered by Google Cloud, which is amazing. We built it because, again, usually I think satellite data takes months to come out, and our goal is to have it come out within a week. And that'll be January 2025 when we achieve that. So that's what I'm going to be doing between now and January 2025, is getting that process honed. It's we just need to test it with real data. MethaneSat also, it's interesting because my scientists keep telling me, like, we don't know how long it'll take to get a full inventory of the globe because the cloud thing, the upper latitudes, are we gonna be able to see this? And then also, honestly, it depends on how emissions change. You remember getting a stable surface with the air. How many passes do we need? Yeah. How many passes? Well, it depends if it's variable, because if it's highly variable, which we suspect it is, then you're going to need more passes. But if things don't change really that much, like week to week, then it won't take that as long.
Yeah, I mean, even when the starts coming down reliably in January, the really interesting things may not start happening for a couple months later, when there's actually a time series where you start seeing what are the trends across this entire basin. I think that's going to be fascinating just to see, not just for me, but for governments and energy companies alike. So
yeah,
you're passing over. You could catch a flash of a problem, and then that problem may be gone the next day, but you're not going to know that unless you do another pass.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think MethaneSat is interesting because it can give a basin total, and so you'll be able to, on average, see, because regulation is based on averages. It's based on, like, over time, what does this look like? They don't regulate based on the very specific things, although the super emitters are a little different. And so understanding both the basin-wide and then temporally, sort of like what the average is super helpful. And then to see what that distribution of leaks looks like. Is it a fat tail problem? Is it the low, the smaller leaks, whatever. And I think that having that topology, I don't know what to call it, but like having the characterization of the problem in that way will be new and novel and will help regulators understand how to regulate it. The EU actually has, the largest importer of natural gas in the world, has already put laws on the books to buy natural gas from the lowest methane emitting suppliers. So they already know that they've put that like stake in the ground, but they don't actually know what that's going to look like yet. And MethaneSat data and other data from satellites will really help with that. So what's next is really, I think, grappling with the understanding and the knowledge that methane is going to bring, and how that's going to ripple through the advocacy world and the settings of regulation.
Yeah.
I think and to be honest, other entities like governments have asked about using the technology that we've created to put more methane sats up, which would be great. Like, we would love that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I can do this again.
You don't have another satellite in you?
I don't know if I have another satellite.
But no, it's great because also the data is all transparent, and also you're running through those walls that'll make it easier to get the second and third satellites up, whoever actually pays for it. I want to open it up to the audience and get a couple of questions in before we move on. We've got mics right here in the center.
I had a geek question. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
my favorite kind.
Can you explain how you detect different concentrations and volumes, little leaks, big leaks? What happens when the wind is blowing? Just kind of curious how, because I believe, like, you are the guys that were monitoring the leaks down in LA several years ago and all, and this is one of the coolest projects in terms of having immediate impact. But I've always been curious, like, how does it actually work? How do you, because you're using spectral analysis too.
That is correct. So I'm going to be able to take you so far, but not probably as far as you would want to go. But there are papers that I can send you that will explain the rest of it. But the stages of data, L0 all the way to L4, and you might know more about this too, but you're right, it starts with a spectrometer, so it literally looks at how a certain wavelength of light is interacting with the methane, which allows us to estimate methane concentration for the column. And then we have to grid that to put it in geospatial land. And that's a concentration, which is parts per billion, which is not the same as kilograms per hour, which is what we perceive to be more interesting from a regulatory perspective. Parts per million is really important when it comes to I don't know, PM 2.5, because that's what health indicators are based on. What concentration are you breathing? Methane concentrations are also really important because if you get past a certain level, it becomes explosive. So that's obviously an issue. But we're talking about very low concentrations that are environmentally relevant, but not from an explosion perspective. So now we have an understanding of concentrations over a landscape, but this is getting from L3 then, which is concentration, to L4, includes a lot of wind analysis, a lot of meteorology, and this is why the time component is super important, because you're looking at basically a mass balance of a pixel size, and so as the air moves through, you're trying to figure out basically how much methane came in and how much methane goes out. And that's the basin total. That's how you get the basin total. And so you can see how if you can hold time constant, it makes it a lot easier and simpler to reduce the uncertainty associated with that calculation. And then in terms of pinpointing where the leaks came from, which is, it's here, methane is here now, that's the concentration, but where did it come from? That has everything to do with, they call it a back trajectory, source apportionment, and it has to do with models that they create using the most up-to-date wind information. So it is novel science that is being validated. They should divide a new way to do L4. So the scientists that we work with at Harvard are validating this in every which way that they possibly can, which is why it's going to take us till January to get that productionalized information out. But we are publishing peer-reviewed papers all along the way to make all of that information public so that everybody understands how we're validating it and getting there. It is also interesting to me because the way science is done, it's like foundations. Somebody will develop a new method and another method, and they look at it and they look it back. We've done controlled release experiments where we've released methane at a known concentration and then fly over with the airplane. And our methods actually predict very, very well, better than any other method, how much methane was released. So that's another way that we're validating it. But as these foundations get laid, basically, we have to make sure that other methods validate our methods, et cetera. But then sometimes we come up with new things, like these very small leaks having such an impact on the total is slowly being validated by other methods. But since it was new, it was an unusual discovery, I think.
I can just add to say that one thing that helped me was, when the satellite is flying over, it takes a picture of where the methane is at that time the satellite was flying over. But you could look under that plume and see no infrastructure. So the point of this backwards trajectory or inverse modeling is actually to look at, okay, last hour, 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, and use that wind and meteorological data, which direction and how strong, to go backwards and say, oh, that's where it was. And then what's underneath that? Oh, I see, storage vessels are under that. And so that's kind of how the geeky answer to getting where the satellite is taking a picture, spectrometry, all the way to that's where it's coming from. It needs to go be fixed now.
So that was fantastic. I'm sure we would get a ton more questions, but I want to wrap it there so we stay on time. Millie, Karen, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
I can't wait till January to start seeing this data. Thank you.
Thank you.